Hi, it's Katrina. An entirely new species of human has shocked the world. Today, I have some incredible recent discoveries to share with you, including a brand new human species that walked among us, to a 3,000-year-old map of the stars that defies belief, and new insights into the legendary Queen Cleopatra herself. If you're a fan of history, science, and jaw-dropping revelations, then you're in the right place. A mysterious new human species. A new species of ancient human has been discovered, and it's changing history. We weren't alone in the past, and it's making scientists wonder how many other species of humans once roamed the Earth. A team of specialists from the University of Hawaii and the Chinese Academy of Sciences worked together on this one, introducing for the first time ever our brand new human ancestor, the one and only Homo juluensis. If Homo juluensis is a bit of a mouthful, you can just call the new species big head humans. That's what the name literally translates to in English. As far as anyone can tell, the big head humans came onto the Earth scene at the same time as Homo sapiens, but not in the same locations. Scientists think Homo juluensis appeared first in Asia about 300,000 years ago. Homo sapiens appeared around then too, but in Africa. Could these people have been our cousins? They evolved at the same time, but on the other side of the planet, like the Roman Empire and Imperial China. Only you and I are still alive, and Homo juluensis went extinct 50,000 years ago. Let's take a look at the discovery itself to see if we can learn more. The new species has been identified thanks to fossils found at 2 sites in China. Scientists recognize them as a completely different species when they measured their skulls. The heads of these people, wait, is it right to call them people? They weren't apes, but they weren't modern humans either. Let me know if you think people is the right word here. Anyway, they had huge heads. Not just huge, but thick. Neanderthals also had thick heads, so maybe there's a connection between them. Does big head equal big brains? Scientists think it might. These ancient humans were likely skilled in making tools out of stone. Paleontologists believe they could process animal hides, which means they would have worn clothing. And they probably hunted wild horses, which helped them survive in the brutal prehistoric environment. If all this is true, I think it's safe to say that Homo juluensis were indeed people. They were just as technologically advanced as Homo sapiens, maybe even more advanced. Now for the bombshell. With this newest discovery, scientists are convinced that Asia was home to at least 4 distinct hominin species. These weren't just 4 different cultures of people. They were different species, as different as a dog and a wolf or a tiger and a lion. Paleoanthropologists Christopher J. Bay and Xiu-Ji Wu identified the 4 species as Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo longi, and Homo juluensis. Identifying these mysterious species is a start, but much more needs to be done. If you're like me, you want scientists to answer a whole lot more questions about human history. Scientists need to figure out if these ancient people knew each other. Were there warring tribes of different species fighting for domination? Scientists need to learn why so many different species of humans evolved in such a small part of the world. They also need to figure out why different human species were so different. For example, why was Homo floresiensis barely 3 feet tall and living in the caves of Indonesia? How did actual hobbits exist at the same time as Homo sapiens? Perhaps the biggest question of all is how these archaic species fit into the larger mystery of our human existence. Any thoughts? Is this an ancient star map? A rock the size of a tire has archaeologists at each other's throats. It is 3,000 years old and covered in bizarre markings. Experts can't agree on whether the strange stone is an ancient celestial map or some bored person's doodles. The stone, shaped like a disc, was found in an ancient hill fort in Italy a couple years ago. There are markings on its front and back, 29 markings to be exact. Researchers think the marks, which are little more than dots on the stone, could represent the brightest stars in the night sky. If that turns out to be correct, someone's going to need to rewrite a couple history books. This simple stone could be one of the oldest known star maps in the world. A celestial calendar from 2,000 years ago was found in a Chinese tomb, and archaeologists thought that was impressive. But this is even more exciting. Unfortunately, not everybody agrees. Astronomer Ed Krupp at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles said the carved markings on the stone don't necessarily correlate to stars in the sky. The fact they look similar could be an accident. Astronomer Paolo Molaro at the Astronomical Observatory of Trieste said the stone's markings definitely represent real stars in the sky. The precision, scale, and orientation points to the stars being inside the constellations Scorpius and Orion. How is anyone supposed to know who to trust? These are two respected astronomers with completely opposing views of the same artifact. I'll give you some more details and let you decide who you want to believe. The stone disk isn't the only one of its kind. This one was found near Trieste, but two others were found near Gradina in the Brijuni Islands off the edge of Croatia. They all date to what's known as the Proto-Historic period. This was the transitional time between prehistory and more recent civilized history. It lasted from about 1800 to 400 BC. There were indeed astrologers back then. The Greek poet Hesiod wrote that people used the star patterns in Orion and the Pleiades to determine the best time for planting crops in the 8th century BC. Star maps just like this one may have spread from one community to the next as people tried to make sense of the shining stars above them. Cleopatra has been found, finally. Breaking news straight out of Egypt. A statue has been discovered in the alleged tomb of Cleopatra that reveals the ancient queen's true face. For the first time ever, scientists think they know what Cleopatra really looked like. This could finally settle the debate over the ruler's legendary beauty. Some historical sources claim Cleopatra was the most gorgeous woman in history. However, there are modern scholars who think she was actually short, possibly overweight, and maybe even plain and had a hooked nose like a witch. Enter Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a fantastic archaeologist I've mentioned before on the channel who has been hunting for Cleopatra's tomb for the last 2 decades. Dr. Martinez was recently involved in a joint archaeological mission in collaboration with Egyptian and Dominican scientists. They were researching the Taposiris Magna Temple west of Alexandria. Dr. Martinez has been saying for years that Taposiris Magna may have been the burial place of Cleopatra 2,000 years ago. As you may know already, Cleopatra was the final queen of the Nile, the last true pharaoh of ancient Egypt. After her death in 30 BC at the age of 39, Egypt became property of the Romans. Cleopatra died and was buried along with her lover, Mark Antony, and the pair were buried somewhere, but where? It could be at this temple, whose ruins sit at the top of a massive underground labyrinth. Dr. Martinez was the one who found a vast tunnel below the temple that stretches more than 4,000 feet. She believes the body of Cleopatra was secretly moved from the palace through an underground tunnel connected to the temple, and then buried at a secret spot. She has been trying to find that spot for ages, but she keeps finding other stuff instead. Dr. Martinez's most recent discovery included a white marble statue of a woman wearing a royal crown. She thinks it's a bust of Cleopatra, which would be remarkable. Remarkable isn't a strong enough word. Let me just say that if this proves to be a real bust of Cleopatra, it might turn out to be worth millions of dollars for one very good reason. There is not a single bust that can be reliably attributed to Cleopatra. No one knows what her face really looked like. Not even coins with her face on them can be trusted because archaeologists think the coin makers made Cleopatra's face ugly on purpose. It was all part of a smear campaign to make people dislike her. Yes, there is a bust of Cleopatra at the Vatican museums, but it's never been confirmed as the real deal. There also used to be one at the Altes Museum, but archaeologists eventually excluded it. They realized it wasn't Cleopatra at all. It was just a random Roman woman. This bust, found at Taposiris Magna, could be the big one, and it does seem to depict a woman of exceptional beauty. This might confirm the legend that Cleopatra really was drop-dead gorgeous. Now, if Dr. Martinez can find Cleopatra's hidden burial chamber to confirm it, that would be amazing. Every day I'm holding my breath, hoping to read the news that Cleopatra has finally been found. The secret cave of the Templars. At the bottom of a hole in the ground is a mystery so old and so profound that scholars have been struggling to make sense of it for decades. The hole leads to one of the most enigmatic caves in the world. It's a place that was either carved by the Knights Templar or an unknown faction of godless pagans. Royston Cave was found 3 centuries ago in the summer of 1742. It came as a huge surprise to the workmen who were digging foundations for a bench in a butter market when they hit a buried millstone. The millstone had been placed like a sewer grate over a vertical shaft going down into the dark. Being the 18th century, a time when children still worked for the mines, the workers sent a child into the shaft with a candle to see what they might find. Children first! The greedy townsfolk of Royston gathered around the hole in anticipation of the child finding secret treasure. But there was no treasure to be found. The little boy saw in the flickering light of his candle a broken cup, a human skull, and walls covered floor to ceiling in engravings. To this day, no one has ever been able to figure out who carved the cave out of solid bedrock, who etched the images on the walls, or whose skull the boy found in 1742. Cave manager Nicky Patton said that's the fun of Royston Cave. No one can answer the millions of questions people have about it. But there are some clues that point us in the right direction. For example, Royston Cave has the crudely carved figures of saints on its walls. You can see St. Catherine with the torture device she was broken on as a martyr at 18 years old. You can also see St. Lawrence, who was burned to death on a griddle. At first glance, the etchings on the walls do seem religious and overtly Christian, but then you realize that most of the saints are in the middle of being tortured. There's an image of Christ, too, dying on the cross. Then there are the bizarre pagan images, like the fertility symbol known as Sheila na gig. It depicts a woman with exaggerated sexual organs. All in all, the carvings are a little creepy, rudimentary, and unnerving. Who do you imagine would have put together such an ugly assortment of tortured saints and pagan symbolism? One possible answer is the Knights Templar. Some believe they used the cave in secret initiation ceremonies almost 1,000 years ago. But if that's true, why is there so much pagan stuff in the cave? Could the Templars have secretly been pagans all along, only faking their devotion to Christianity? It's crazy to think the charges of heresy brought against the Templars may have been true. But there are other possibilities. The cave itself could predate the drawings, meaning it may have been carved by the ancient Druids. You might be interested to know that the cave is at the intersection of two ancient pathways known as ley lines. One of those pathways is the Michael Line, which runs directly through the Stonehenge and Avebury stone circles. If you don't believe in ley lines, you can at least appreciate that the cave sits directly at the intersection of two ancient physical roads. One was the Icknield Way, which ran from Norfolk to Wiltshire, and the other was Ermine Street, a road built by the Romans that used to go from London to York. Whichever way you slice it, Royston Caves is at the center of a major ancient intersection. But that still doesn't solve the mystery of who built it and what its purpose was. The main issue for historians is that there are no documents mentioning the cave anywhere, meaning it must have been a well-kept secret. Recently, the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds tried to date the carvings by using stylistic examination. Their analysis showed the carvings were probably made around 1350 AD, a century after the Templars had already been burned at the stake. Maybe the cave was built by a fringe group of surviving Templars, ones that may have been twisted and obsessed with martyrs and paganism. I don't know. Chernobyl dogs have superpowers. Scientists have found that dogs living near the Chernobyl disaster site have developed superpowers. Yep, superpowers! I'm not even joking. Chernobyl dogs have developed mutations that make them immune to certain things that ordinary dogs aren't. I'm not saying we could see mutated super soldiers in the future, hulking green men with rippling muscles and an immunity to radiation, but hey, who knows? Dogs in the Chernobyl nuclear disaster zone are now immune to radiation. They are also immune to heavy metals and pollution. This is crazy news. Scientists have confirmed it with blood samples. They took samples from 116 stray dogs living peacefully in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Most of them proved to have superpowers. The nuclear meltdown may have been a disaster for humans in the area, but it proved to be a boon for wildlife. You won't find many other places in Europe with such abundant, carefree creatures living without humans around to bother them. Wild dogs have flourished, and even wolves have returned to the area. The blood samples showed that the dogs somehow adapted to long-term exposure to one of the most toxic environments in the world. The official Chernobyl exclusion zone has about 11.28 millirem of radiation. That is 6 times more than humans should be exposed to. As a little reminder, the Chernobyl disaster struck on April 26, 1986. Reactor number 4 had a meltdown and then exploded. It was one of the biggest releases of radioactive material into the environment in our history as humans. The exclusion zone is home to an estimated 900 stray dogs. Most of them are thought to be descendants of pets that were abandoned when Chernobyl residents were forced to evacuate. They have taken over the abandoned radioactive wasteland. The blood samples were transported to the US for DNA extraction. Scientists at Columbia University confirmed a unique genetic makeup inside these resilient animals. Certain changes have been made to their genetic structure that are wildly divergent from the rest of the dog genome. The changes allow these animals to live in places that are poisoned, toxic, and radiated. It's kind of good news because if there is ever nuclear Armageddon, it means the cockroaches and the dogs will survive. And let's not forget the wolves. A different team of researchers recently put forward their findings that mutant wolves are living in the toxic habitat as well, and they too are resilient to radiation. I almost forgot about the frogs. Eastern tree frogs are typically green, but not in the exclusion zone. Near Chernobyl, all the tree frogs have turned black, but there isn't anything wrong with them. They live the same amount of time as their non-mutated friends. It makes you wonder what mutations humans would have developed if they'd stayed in the exclusion zone. I also wonder what these animals will look like in another 30 or 40 generations. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. A Roman goblet full of something gross. In England, archaeologists found an Anglo-Saxon burial, which is normal, but there was something in it that took them by surprise. An ancient Roman goblet had been placed near the dead person's head and filled with something odd. 1,500 years ago, a teenage girl died from unknown causes in England. She must have been a relatively wealthy member of society because she was given an extra decent burial. Her grave was filled with a variety of artifacts, including the Roman goblet. The goblet was placed by her head and filled with pig fat. Scientists are scratching their heads right now trying to figure out what the point of all of this was. Why pig fat? What was the purpose of the enameled goblet? And who was this mysterious teenage girl? I know, it's a ton of questions and I don't have the answers. What I can tell you is that the mysterious grave was found in the small village of Scremby, which is in Lincolnshire. Medieval archaeologist Hugh Wilmot said the burial is one of a kind, and it must have had a unique purpose. The girl's burial plot was found in a cemetery with 49 other graves. They all date to the early Anglo-Saxon period of between 480 and 540 AD. However, the girl's grave is the only one of note. The rest are fairly normal. The Roman goblet in the girl's grave is from 1,800 years ago. It's covered in motifs of half-moons and hearts, and is honestly a really impressive relic. Its enamel is red and aquamarine and bluish purple. It was probably imported from France. To understand more about the goblet, the scientific team analyzed organic residue inside of it. They identified a high concentration of lipids, which probably came from pig fat. Why was a young woman buried with a cup full of animal fat? Think it over, and I'll get back to that in a second. Another mystery about the cup is that scientists don't know where the Anglo-Saxons got it from. It's in remarkable condition, meaning they probably didn't find it at random. It must have been passed down as an heirloom, or it was scavenged from another Roman grave. Remember, the goblet was made at least 300 years before the girl was buried. This would be like you being buried with an artifact from the early 1700s. It's possible, but pretty rare, don't you think? Have you decided why the young woman was buried with animal fat yet? If you guessed moisturizer, you could be right. Romans were notorious for using animal fats as moisturizers for their skin. There could have been some left over in the goblet. If you guessed medicine, you could also be right. In the 6th century, physician Anthimus from the Byzantine Empire wrote that the Franks ate raw bacon fat to treat parasites. They also rubbed it into their wounds. Maybe the Anglo-Saxon girl was a medical practitioner. No one knows. Her name, history, and connection to the goblet will probably remain unknown forever. Slaves found on the president's property. A graveyard of slaves has been found at the home of a dead American president. They were African slaves who perished on the plantation of a man whose name you have definitely heard before. Andrew Jackson, the 7th president of the United States, owned a plantation in Tennessee. Between 1804 and the Civil War's end in 1865, at least 28 enslaved people died on that plantation. Nobody knew where they were buried until now. The Andrew Jackson Foundation announced the grim discovery to the public. Radar scans revealed 28 bodies buried under the soil, including small graves for children and infants. They were found with help from archaeologist James Green. James was called to the property, known as the Hermitage, late last year. Workers cleared the trees, and James walked the property feeling for depressions underfoot, which would indicate a grave site. Once James pinpointed the probable location of a cemetery, the ground-penetrating radar was used to confirm bodies below. And while it did confirm 28, there are probably more. A thick tangle of roots below the ground obscured the radar, preventing it from seeing the whole picture. It seems the slaves were buried next to a creek not even 1,000 feet from the mansion of the former American president. And he wasn't the only president who supported and participated in the enslavement of human beings. A dozen early U.S. presidents owned slaves. There has been an effort in recent years to find the graves of those enslaved people on former presidents' properties. At the Hermitage, a few hundred feet away from where Andrew Jackson lived, you can still visit the cabins where his enslaved workers lived, and you can get a rough idea of what conditions were like. You might also like to know that at the time of Andrew Jackson's death, he legally owned roughly 150 people. A cave, a Minotaur, and the Reaper. A real-world Minotaur has been discovered in a cave in Ukraine. A brave adventurer journeyed deep into a dark and cavernous underworld, only to find themselves surrounded by shining crystals and mythological monsters. The brave adventurer in this case is a man with a YouTube channel called Fearless and Far. He descended into what the locals call Optimistic Cave. That's a nice name. It's a subterranean world of creepy passages covered in sharp, milky crystals. And the cave is home to some seriously bizarre sculptures that nobody knows the origin of. On his journey into darkness, our YouTuber friend found the sculpture of a Grim Reaper, the sculpture of a legendary Minotaur, and the sculpture of what looked to be a 20th century miner with a hard hat on. What a weird assortment of characters. The even weirder thing is that nobody knows who put these sculptures inside the cave. One rumor is that they were brought by missionaries who first discovered the cave in 1966, but it's never been confirmed. The sculptures are really high quality and were definitely not made underground. They look like something you'd expect to see in a public square or standing in the lobby of a Vegas casino. But they are down here in the 5th largest cave in the world, its corridors stretching like hollow roots 140 miles through the earth. Crystals grow on the walls in various colors, originating more than 10 million years ago. The walls are pure crystal, unlike anything you've seen before on the surface. The sculptures are just a bonus, albeit a weird bonus, to exploring this incredibly ancient and primordial underworld. Would you be brave enough to adventure into the twisting dark of Optimistic Cave, knowing you might never see the sun again? The Tomb of Deadly Secrets. Archaeologists found an ancient tomb filled with gold in Central America. They hadn't realized the tomb also contained a deadly secret. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Panama? It's probably the canal, right? But thousands of years before the Panama Canal was built, the country was home to a civilization known as the Goblet. These ancient people settled in a valley that was carved out by the Rio Grande. They built things out of pottery and lived simple, sustainable lives for thousands of years. It was only when the Spanish arrived in 1550 that the Goblet culture began to vanish. By the 20th century, they'd faded into legends, and their cities had become lost. Fast forward to 1927, archaeologists uncovered El Caño Archaeological Park. It is full of pre-Columbian burials. Scientists have been finding graves of ancient humans on and off here for the last 100 years. In 2011, researchers found the body of a Goblet warrior who had been buried with a heap of gold artifacts. The warrior had also been buried on the top of a pile of 25 other dead people. That's a bit extreme, no? Researchers think that, like the early Egyptians, the Goblet elite sacrificed those they wished to bring into the afterlife with them. For example, their favorite concubines and servants. A much more recent discovery was that of a tomb from 1,200 years ago. The Ministry of Culture in Panama reported that the tomb belonged to an important lord, possibly a chieftain or a primitive king. He died around the age of 30 and was buried on a mountain of ceramic pottery. Archaeologists also found a few gold trinkets, some earrings, bone flutes, and the body of a female. It seems this lord was buried with someone he liked enough that she was probably killed to join him in the afterlife. This is the dark and deadly secret of the ancient Goblet. They performed a type of human sacrifice that archaeologists call retainer sacrifice. But they probably performed other sacrifices as well. Those Mesoamerican gods were bloodthirsty. The Ancient Amulet. Have you ever wondered how Christianity spread so fast? It's a puzzle that scientists are one step closer to solving thanks to an incredible amulet found north of the Alps. Archaeologists uncovered a skeleton in 2018 near Frankfurt am Main in Germany. The skeleton happened to be wearing an amulet at his time of death, and it was still preserved along with his bones. Once the skeleton and the amulet were back in the lab, scientists were able to date them both to the 3rd century AD. This man died a little more than 100 years after Jesus Christ was crucified in Jerusalem. The timing is incredibly important because in the 3rd century, there were no Christians beyond the Alps. This amulet is the oldest piece of evidence of Christianity north of that great European mountain range that stretches across Switzerland, Germany, Italy, and France. It's pretty impressive and difficult to get across. You have to remember that Christianity originated with Christ and his followers in what is now Israel. For the religion to reach Europe in only a couple decades was quite the feat. But for it to breach the mountains and spread into northern Europe where the Celts and barbarian tribes lived was practically impossible. Keep in mind the Vikings, who lived 1,000 years after Christ, still hadn't adopted Christianity. So what was this amulet doing so far north in Europe? That's the mystery scientists want to solve. Could the amulet have belonged to an early Christian missionary? Could it change the whole history of their religion? Professor Marcus Scholz created a 3D model of the amulet, which allowed scientists to read the 18 lines of text inscribed on it in Latin. The text includes the names of Jesus, God, and Saint Titus. This was definitely a religious emblem belonging to a Christian at a time when Roman emperors were still feeding them to the lions, allegedly. Hopefully more research will reveal how Christianity became such a big success so quickly. It blew up quicker than Wham in the 80s. The incredible Mayan god of lightning. A new train is being built across the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It's called the Mayan Railroad, and it will connect ancient sites so that tourists can visit them more easily. During construction, a small but expertly crafted sculpture was found. Most of it was broken, but the head is still very well preserved. Archaeologists think it's a sculpture of Ka-Wil, the Maya god of lightning, serpents, and abundance. The artifact is a fantastic discovery because it's a real, tangible piece of the ancient Maya belief system. The statue has a zoomorphic skull, preposterously big eyes, and an upturned snout. It also has a cigar sticking out of its head. Although Ka-Wil was an important deity, there aren't very many surviving depictions of him today. There have only been 3 other sculptures of this god found, all of them at the ancient city of Tikal in Guatemala. This is the first one ever found in Mexico. Sculptures aside, the only depictions of Ka-Wil are in paintings and Maya codices. This isn't the first time something cool has been found while building the Mayan train over the last couple of years. Last April, archaeologists rescued a Maya canoe that is 1,000 years old. They also found an 8,000-year-old skeleton in a cenote near Tulum, and an entire city in Quintana Roo that's been dubbed Pamul II. And of course, let's not forget the 48,971 ancient buildings, almost 900,000 pieces of pottery, 491 human remains, and 1,307 natural features that have also been found while building the railroad. Archaeologists and geologists and historians can barely keep up. I really want to ride on that train. Thanks for watching. What was your favorite discovery? What would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!